Federal court takes emergency action after families report loved ones vanishing from their homes in recent weeks. A federal judge has issued an emergency order halting the Trump administration's detention of refugees in Minnesota, marking a significant legal intervention in what attorneys describe as an unprecedented operation targeting lawfully resettled individuals across the state. U.S. District Judge John R. Tunheim delivered the ruling on Wednesday, temporarily blocking the arrest and detention of refugees who had been legally resettled in Minnesota, while a class action lawsuit challenging the administration's re-vetting policy proceeds through the courts. The judge's order mandates the immediate release of all detained refugees currently held in Minnesota and requires those who were transferred to detention facilities in Texas to be released within 5 days. The legal action comes in response to a wave of arrests that have swept through Minnesota's refugee community in recent weeks. According to attorneys and advocacy groups working with affected families, more than 100 refugees who had lawfully resettled in the state were taken into custody during this period. Court filings reveal that some of those detained were subsequently transported by air to detention centers located in Texas, adding another layer of complexity and distress to an already challenging situation. The arrests stem from what the Trump administration has designated as Operation Paris, an initiative announced earlier this month that the Department of Homeland Security described as a sweeping program aimed at re-examining thousands of refugee cases. According to the administration's stated objectives, this operation involves conducting new background checks and implementing intensive verification procedures for refugee claims that had already been approved through the standard resettlement process. The scope of Operation Paris, as outlined by the Department of Homeland Security, encompasses approximately 5,600 refugees who had been resettled in the United States but had not yet obtained permanent resident status. These individuals, despite having already undergone the extensive vetting process required for refugee admission to the United States, now find themselves subject to this additional layer of scrutiny. The lawsuit that prompted Judge Tunheim's intervention was filed as a class action case on behalf of affected refugees. Court documents detail troubling accounts of how these arrests were conducted and the treatment individuals received while in custody. One plaintiff, identified in court filings as D. Doe to protect his identity, provided a particularly striking account of his detention experience. According to the legal filing, D. Doe was at home with his family when someone in plain clothes appeared at his door, claiming to have struck Doe's vehicle. When Doe stepped outside to inspect the alleged damage to his car, he found himself suddenly surrounded by armed individuals who proceeded to arrest him. The court documents state that he was initially detained in Minnesota before being transported by air to Texas, where he underwent interrogation regarding his refugee status. Following this interrogation, he was released in Texas and left to arrange his own transportation back to Minnesota. In a statement included in the court proceedings, D. Doe expressed his distress at the situation. He stated that he had fled his home country due to government repression and expressed disbelief that similar circumstances were now occurring in the United States. The filing also notes that his wife, who is herself a refugee, had become afraid to leave her residence following her husband's arrest and had relocated to stay with friends due to fears that agents might return to their home. The pattern of arrests has generated widespread anxiety throughout Minnesota's refugee community. Many refugees had already been hesitant to leave their homes or travel to their places of employment, due to concerns about being stopped amid the thousands of immigration agents conducting enforcement operations throughout the state. The recent detentions have intensified these fears, with community members expressing concern about potential racial profiling during these immigration sweeps. It is important to note that refugees undergo an exceptionally thorough vetting process before they are approved for resettlement in the United States. This process, which involves multiple layers of security checks and interviews, can extend over a period of years. When refugees ultimately arrive in the United States, they do so on flights that are coordinated with the government as part of the official resettlement program. This established process stands in contrast to the additional revetting procedures now being implemented under Operation Paris. Michelle Garnett McKenzie, who serves as executive director of the Advocates for Human Rights, characterized the operation in strong terms. She described Operation Paris's approach to detaining lawfully present refugees as an unprecedented assault on fundamental human rights protections that are established in both the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and the 1980 Refugee Act, passed by the United States Congress. Mackenzie expressed approval of the court's decision to intervene in the matter. At the time of reporting, the Department of Homeland Security had not provided a response to inquiries regarding the court's ruling. The administration's position on the judge's order, and whether it plans to appeal the decision, remains unclear at this stage. According to Mackenzie, one of the most difficult aspects of these detention operations has been the speed with which refugees were being removed from Minnesota. She noted that individuals were being detained and transported out of state within a matter of hours or days, leaving their family members struggling to locate them and arrange legal representation. This rapid removal process created significant challenges for families attempting to navigate the legal system and understand what was happening to their loved ones. The attorney also pointed out that because these individuals had already completed the refugee vetting process and had been legally resettled in the United States, the vast majority did not have immigration attorneys at the time of their arrest. This lack of existing legal representation added to the difficulties families faced in responding to the sudden detentions. The circumstances surrounding the releases of detained individuals have been equally problematic, according to legal representatives. Court filings and attorney accounts describe cases where individuals, after experiencing the ordeal of arrest, detention, and transfer to another state, were subsequently flown back to Minnesota and released without their families receiving advance notification. In at least one documented instance, an individual was released in the middle of the night with no prior warning given to family members. Mackenzie recounted the experience of one client who was placed on an aircraft in Texas without being informed of his destination. The lack of information left this individual under the impression that he was being deported to his country of origin, only to discover upon landing that he had been returned to Minnesota. The uncertainty and fear experienced during this process represent the kind of trauma that Judge Tunheim referenced in his ruling. Another case described by the attorney involved an individual who was released in Texas without any personal belongings, money, or identification documents. The circumstances of such releases left individuals stranded far from home, facing the challenge of finding transportation back to Minnesota and reuniting with their families. In his written ruling issued on Wednesday, Judge Tunheim addressed the human impact of these operations directly. He stated that the court finds the threat of irreparable harm in this case favors the granting of immediate relief. The judge specifically noted that the accounts of terror and trauma detailed by the named plaintiffs in their amended petition make the potential for harm impossible to ignore. The legal proceedings continue as the underlying lawsuit challenging the administration's revetting policy moves forward through the court system. While Judge Tunheim's order provides temporary relief by halting further detentions and requiring the release of those currently in custody, the broader questions regarding the legality and scope of Operation Paris remain to be resolved through the ongoing litigation. The situation in Minnesota reflects broader tensions surrounding immigration enforcement policy and the treatment of individuals who have been granted refugee status in the United States. The coming days and weeks will reveal how the administration responds to the court's order and whether additional legal challenges emerge in other jurisdictions where similar operations may be underway. For Minnesota's refugee community, the immediate concern centers on the return and well-being of those who were detained and the question of whether they can resume their lives without fear of further arrest. The court's order provides a degree of protection, at least temporarily, though uncertainty remains about the long-term trajectory of the administration's revetting initiative. As this situation continues to develop, legal observers, advocacy organizations, and affected communities are monitoring closely for any new information that might emerge regarding the scope of Operation Paris, the criteria being used to select individuals for revetting, and the procedures that will govern any future enforcement actions. The resolution of the class action lawsuit will likely have significant implications for refugee policy and the rights of lawfully resettled individuals throughout the United States. At this stage, what remains clear is that the court has found sufficient cause to intervene in the administration's operations, citing concerns about irreparable harm and the rights of individuals who underwent the established legal process for refugee resettlement. The full details of how this order will be implemented and what steps will follow as the litigation proceeds have not yet been disclosed and will presumably become apparent in the coming days.